Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast is here. I want to get Mosher's talk. I was asked a question this morning about what I'm most excited about for Eagles training camp. Eagles training camp starts in less than 2 weeks. The Eagles report on July 22nd. Their first practice is July the 23rd, and we'll be all over that. Of course, football at 4 every day. So the question I got asked this morning was, what am I most excited about with Eagles training camp starting? And, you could go with so many different things. Are you excited about a right guard battle? Probably not, but at least there's something to pay attention to there. You got the cornerback spot, you got the safety spot, you got the linebacking spot, you got all that stuff going on. But I think, for me, the thing that I am most excited about, the thing that I am most intrigued to watch this training camp is something, and it is apropos for this particular person. It's the one thing that I think everyone should be excited about and everybody should be talking about. And yet, with this particular player, it's always being swept under the radar. It is kind of apropos for Jalen Hurts. What version of Jalen Hurts are we going to get as the encore to the guy who was the MVP of the Super Bowl? That is what I'm most excited about. What guy are we getting when the Super Bowl champion MVP steps out on the field in Dallas? What's the next level? What more is there for Jalen Hurts? I think that, to me, is the biggest question and the biggest story. And when I got asked the question today, what am I most excited about? I could say, what's the encore for Saquon Barkley? I could say, I want to see how they use Jahad Campbell. I could say, is Drew Bakuba going to be a part of the defense? I could say, what's Nolan Smith going to be? I can go with Jalen Hunt. What version of Jalen Carter are we going to get? But to me, the most important guy and the most interesting guy on the list is Jalen Hurts. What level of Jalen Hurts is this team going to get? That should be the answer, right? We just talked about Jared Goff. Being the number 1 overall pick and what he has done for that franchise. Jalen Hurts has done something with the Eagles franchise that nobody thought was possible. He won them a Super Bowl. When they drafted Jalen Hurts, there's nobody, period, out there that said, oh my God, they just drafted the next Super Bowl MVP. Nobody. All people did was bemoan the fact that they took a quarterback in the second round. Why'd you do that? We already have our quarterback. Why would you do that? They already have the guy. They just signed him to this big deal. Why would you take a quarterback in the second round? So the question I got asked this morning was, what am I most excited about for this Eagles training camp to begin? And Geoff Mosher, my answer is, I want to see what the encore is for Jalen Hurts. I feel like he's the guy that is always disrespected. He's always the guy that is kind of under the radar. But I want to see what's the next step for Jalen Hurts as Super Bowl MVP, Super Bowl champion, guy that got to the Super Bowl, guy who's never missed the playoffs. I want to see what version of Jalen Hurts we get. That would be my answer, Geoff Mosher, about who or what I am most excited about as we get ready for training camp next week. Why is it that Jalen Hurts is always the afterthought pick, right? I think Mosher's frozen. He looks like he's frozen. He looks like he's just kind of... So we'll try to get him out of there and put him back in the spot. But that's my answer. It's Jalen Hurts, right? If I was to say to you guys, number one, right off the bat, what are you most excited about? Training camp starts in less than 2 weeks.
I think it has to be Jalen Hurts. I think it has to be.
You go with Jalen Hurts.
The guy's a Super Bowl MVP. I like this. I really like this.
Okay.
Because, he is someone that, nobody really expected him to be this good.
All right, well, let's bring Mosher into the conversation now and see what this is. All right, Mosher, that was the question I got asked this morning. What am I most excited about for Eagles training camp? And my answer was, I want to see what the encore is for Jalen Hurts. Is it fair to assume that there is another step in his progression, that there is another level of success and production from him?
So that's a good question. Is it fair to assume that there is? I think yes. There's going to be there's going to be a progression, but at the same time, he's been a starting quarterback for about 5 or 6 years now, and I don't think you're going to see, and I could be wrong, but I don't know if you're going to see something that's such a big step up as far as he's a different kind of quarterback. I feel like that we've gotten to a point where you know what his strengths are. He has a lot of them. He has a couple of limitations, just a couple. So if you were to really be ticky-tack and pick apart like the fact that he doesn't throw very often, if ever, in a game in the middle of the field, I don't know that part of him will ever change. If it does, I think then you're looking at a player who could easily be considered the best player in the NFL. I just think there are just a few things that he doesn't do that probably separate him from that list of people who are just elite at everything. So I'm like you, Mike. I think it's fair to assume there'll be parts of his game that get better because they do every year, but I'm just not sure how higher the ceiling is going to be.
Well, if I was to ask you then, Geoff Mosher, what's the next step in the elevation that you want to see from him? I mean, because no one's ever a finished product. Like, what is the next thing that you want to see him be a part of or something different from Jalen this year?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you hold them to their word, and they've talked about opening up the offense and being a different iteration of themselves, right? And obviously, it's not the running offense that they're talking about when they say that. Although I do think that there are ways to incorporate different runs in the week. That's a whole other separate conversation. But what they're talking about is opening up the pass offense. We know A.J. Brown has been frustrated at times, and so has the coaching staff, and so is Jalen. So the next step is just, I think, becoming a more rhythm and timing passer who uses the entire field at his discretion. He didn't have to in the NFC Championship game in the Super Bowl, but not every year you're going to have as good of a defense and as good of a 53 and as great of weapons, So I think the next step for him would be to become more of a timing and rhythm passer over the middle. But I can't tell you that if he doesn't take that step that the Eagles are going to be in bad hands either.
We talk about lists all the time. This is the list season, blah, blah, blah. And he's generally not included in the top 5, top 7, maybe top 10. Why is that in your mind? What more does he need to do to kind of win those people over? Or is that just not going to happen?
Yeah, I think in some regards it may not happen. In other, I think only a few people have I ever seen not put him in the top 10. When you talk about disrespectful, I think that's fair. I really don't think Jalen Hurts is disrespected as much as maybe Philadelphians think he is, because I would say there are some really good quarterbacks in this league who've probably accomplished more with less, and they're just as good, if not as good. I have no problem with putting Jalen anywhere in that second tier beyond like the top 2 or 3. And he could be 4, 5, 6. I don't care that to me, but I don't think that's disrespectful. Everybody talks about, well, he beat Patrick Mahomes. He's a Super Bowl champion. But a lot of these people are the same people who said Joe Flacco wasn't elite when he was going to the playoffs every single year and finally won a Super Bowl and won a Super Bowl MVP. Winning a Super Bowl and Super Bowl MVP is great, and it validates your career when you're really good, but it doesn't make you the best at anything, one position, just because.
I would agree with that. He's just an interesting one because I think we look at Jalen, and again, this conversation today is based on our unsportsmanlike moment of the day. It had to do with Jared Goff as the number 1 overall pick. Has he fulfilled his duty as a number 1 overall pick? He got to a Super Bowl. He's made the Lions a respectable franchise. I think Jared Goff has done his duty as a number 1 overall pick. But when you are Jalen Hurts, I don't know what more he could do to win people over who still question whether or not, and you're like, well, he's won a Super Bowl. He's been the MVP of the Super Bowl. That's different from the Brad Johnsons, the Trent Dilfers, that level of quarterback who were the game managers who got to the Super Bowl and someone else. He was the MVP of the Super Bowl and a big part of why they got there, and yet doesn't get he's not in the Lamar Jackson, the Josh Allen, the Joe Burrow. Is there anything he could do to get put into that category or not really?
I think he could. I mean, if he wins a bunch of Super Bowls more, I mean, I certainly think he can. I guess I would ask this, Mike. Like, Troy Aikman won 3 Super Bowls, right? Is that correct? Troy Aikman won 3 Super Bowls?
Yes, he was quarterback for the 3 teams.
Right, and I think he was the Super Bowl MVP for at least one of them, if I'm not mistaken. And he's in the Hall of Fame, but I don't think Troy Aikman is considered like the top 3 quarterback of his era.
So is Jalen Hurts the modern day Troy Aikman, is what you're saying?
And what I would ask is that disrespectful? Does anybody look at Troy Aikman and say it's really disrespectful?
Okay, how would you compare Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson?
Well, I mean, nobody really compares to Lamar Jackson and what they can do athletically, right? I mean, and his arm, his ability to throw on the run, like fastballs, like nobody has that. Maybe Josh Allen does, but yeah, very, very different. They play the game differently. But I do think Lamar Jackson is a little bit more of a ball distributor. There are different sets of weapons, and clearly he likes his tight ends. He throws to Likely, throws to Andrews. He's not as reluctant over the middle, but he also has maybe the best arm in the NFL. So you're less reluctant to less afraid to make throws like that when you know you have that kind of arm and riverboat gambler mentality. So you don't find that in a lot of human beings, let alone quarterbacks. So he's amazing. So I don't know. Are you asking me who's better, or like where would I put him on the list or something?
Yeah, I think. Because I think a lot of people look at Lamar as a guy who has not won the big game, can't win the big game because of the deficiencies in the pass game potentially. Now, he's an interesting one because he really hasn't had the weapons. Jalen has the weapons. So if you flip-flop them, as Jackson win the Super Bowl and Hurts is in that situation, I think if those two guys flip-flopped, it would be interesting.
Yeah. Lamar played a pretty darn good game in that AFC game. I know that there were the 2 turnovers, and that happens, but he played a pretty good game there. Mark Andrews drops the ball that otherwise could have made a difference in that game, right? If that's the game I'm thinking about, yeah. So I think the book on Lamar is not closed. He can win a Super Bowl next year or the year after or 5 or 6 years later, and then you're going to look back on his career and say, this guy won all these playoff games. He won a Super Bowl. He is the Aaron Rodgers of his time. He may only be one, but he made ridiculous, athletic plays. So he's a great quarterback. That's why I hate the whole ranking. Like I put a couple of guys in the elite, like Mahomes, I think is definitely the elite quarterback of the generation, the era. I do think Joe Burrow is fantastic quarterback with very few flaws. But then even after those two, and Lamar is probably I would put those 3 guys as like in my upper echelon, put them in a blender. All 3 of them are amazing. Mahomes is the most accomplished. And then anybody after that, if you want to put Jalen Hurts after that, that's fine. I got no argument with it. But I also don't argue if you put Matthew Stafford in it or Josh Allen in it or somebody else.
Yeah, Josh Allen's another interesting one because he hasn't won anything, but he's been the MVP. And Hurts, it's just like, that was the interesting part. Like the conversation was, what am I interested in? I want to see if this is the year that Hurts finally gets that recognition of he's in that level with those group of guys. Because it always seems like he's the other guy, yet he's had more success than all of them. What level of success do you have to reach to get to that next level of recognition, I guess?
I'll throw not only will I use the Troy Aikman reference, but how about Terry Bradshaw? He has 4 Super Bowls. He played really well in a couple of Super Bowls where they had to throw the ball a lot to Swin, to Stallworth, right, and Lynn Swann, I believe. And he won a couple of Super Bowl MVPs, but nobody says that Terry Bradshaw was a top 3 quarterback of his era because he also threw a truckload of interceptions. He didn't throw the ball a whole lot. He wasn't the most accurate guy in the world, but they're both in the Hall of Fame, and they're both recognized as some of the best to ever play the game. So is that not good enough? Like, do you have to be considered number one when there are clearly a guy or two who are just better than, like, Joe Montana was better than Troy Aikman. Is there anything Troy Aikman could have done? I don't know. Like,
and
by the way, Dan Marino is probably better than Troy Aikman, but Dan Marino only won one Super Bowl. Is there anything Troy Aikman could have done? I don't know.
Yeah. All right, Geoff Mosher, of course, from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, football at 4. We'll do a Monday Mosher mailbag. We're going to have a couple Mondays left before the start of training camp, so we'll do 2 more Mosher mailbag Mondays on the offseason. Then we will be into training camp mode, and, of course, that will be all right here on football at 4. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. Thanks, buddy.
You got it. Take care.